pass it to future generations in good shape. And that is also the aim of Europa Nostra. So who we are a leading citizens movement to protect and celebrate Europe's cultural and natural heritage. And Europa Nostra UK is just a branch of Europa Nostra. We are a UK-based charity, and our aim is to nurture enthusiasm for our shared European cultural heritage, articulate values that connect us to our European colleagues in Europe, to raise profile of Europa Nostra, foster links with British organizations as well as individuals interested in cultural heritage, and of course to sustain UK participation in shaping European heritage policy. The European Heritage Awards, Europa Nostra Awards, were launched in 2002 by the European Commission and have been run by Europa Nostra ever since. And well, I've been myself on a jury for those awards, actually in a research category for a few years. And I can tell you, it's a most amazing celebration of European heritage, of protection of European heritage. And what is wonderful about those awards, that they can be awarded to large projects of multi-million funding, involved big teams of international experts, but they can be also awarded to small groups of local citizens who do some special work to protect and to take care of the local heritage. And I think that range and that the idea of sharing that heritage and appreciating larger and smaller projects is what is very special about these very prestigious awards. And MINIARE project received such an award in 2023 in the category research. And it was launched in 2012 by Cambridge University as a cross-disciplinary project, which employs non-invasive analytical methods to identify the painting materials and techniques in manuscripts and incorporates these discoveries into textual, art historian, and provenance research. So MINIARE brings studies of the artistic, cultural, political, social, and economic environments in which the manuscripts were created, and together with cutting-edge scientific protocols and digital technology. We are delighted to have with us the two key activists of the project, Dr. Suzanne Reynolds, Senior Curator of Manuscripts and Rare Books at the Fitzwilliam Museum, Cambridge. Suzanne joined the Fitzwilliam in 2014 and has worked on medieval manuscripts over a career in both academia and heritage. And Suzanne will be joined by Dr. Flavia Fiorillo, who is research scientist at the Fitzwilliam Museum and Cambridge University Library, who has been working on the analysis of illuminated manuscripts since 2020. And before I let them speak, I can tell you I saw Flavia doing amazing things, and I think she will give you a bit of snapshot of it today. I saw manuscript, which I could have a look very closely, and I could see what I could see. And then Flavia, with her amazing technology, showed completely different depth of detail and content of that manuscript that, of course, hugely helped in both interpretation and shed light of its context as well as content. So I find it extremely fascinating, and I'm sure that you will find it too. Over to you, Suzanne and Flavia. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Flavia is going to share her screen so that we can see a presentation we've prepared, but perhaps I'll just introduce you by explaining our title, MINIARE. It's both a medieval word and an acronym, and it was one of our very clever forerunners in the project, Dr. Paolo Ricciardi, who came up with this rather brilliant conception that the medieval Latin word for adding red and illuminating a manuscript, which is MINIARE, could also be this rather fantastic acronym for the work that we do. Manuscript illumination, non-invasive analysis, research, and expertise. And you see here our home institution, as it were, the Fitzwilliam Museum in Cambridge, and just a glimpse of the kind of instrumentation hovering above a manuscript page. And I don't think it would be an exaggeration to say that we have been crucial to establishing heritage science as part of the work of the research landscape in the University of Cambridge. It's very important to realise that this is a project that's been going on for a while, with a team that has shifted and evolved over at least 10 years. In the bottom right-hand corner here, you see Dr. Stella Paniotova, whose brainchild MINIARE is, who founded the project, and other of our colleagues who have worked on it over time. And it's really important to say that we are a very multidisciplinary team, that we embrace research, curatorial work, conservation, photography, interpretation, and display. So our aims are always to dig deep and disseminate broadly, and I hope that will come across in what we're saying. I'm going to hand over to Flavia, who's going to talk you through how we work, and then I'll pick up again with some manuscripts.
Hi, the scientific techniques that we use in museum settings are constantly evolving and changing, and during the years, new cutting-edge techniques were included in the protocol to better identify the materials. And the techniques that we used are all non-invasive, so we avoid taking samples or touching the manuscripts, and portable. We start with imaging techniques, and then we employ some spectroscopic techniques and microscopy, producing a report that can be read by colleagues with a different background. And the integration of the results overcomes the limitations of each technique and offers a comprehensive characterization of the materials and painting techniques. And here you can see examples of the techniques in action. These slides show the wide range of materials that an artist in the Middle Ages could use. A colorant is what gives the color. It can be inorganic or organic, and the inorganic pigments is the pigments, for instance, that comes from a mineral like cinnabar or azurite, or it is obtained through a synthetic process like smalt or verdigris. While anorganic pigments, also called dye, can be extracted from plants like saffron, indigo, madder, or obtained from animals like cochineal or kermes. And the colorant is applied as a powder, which needs to be mixed with a binding medium. And different binders could be used in the Middle Ages, like vegetable gums extracted from trees like gum arabic, egg whites, egg yolk, whole egg, or size made of animal glue. And metals like gold and silver were often used in manuscripts too. They can be powdered and mixed with a binder, which is known as shell gold or shell silver, or applied as a thin leaf. And metal leaves are usually applied onto a ground of gypsum or calcite, or sometimes colored, called ball, to give a warmer or cooler hue to the metal leaf. And as we have seen, the materials present in a manuscript, the materials are quite heterogeneous, they are complex, they are layered, they are usually of natural origin and aged, and their composition can be quite variable, and this is a real challenge for the analyst. And then Suzanne.
Fantastic. Thank you. So those are the techniques and some of the materials that we have uncovered, and there's obviously going to be this technical thread running through our talk, but I think and I hope what we will also demonstrate is that fundamentally what the project reveals is that we're talking about an extremely human phenomenon, or set of human phenomena. We end up talking about human ingenuity, skill and innovation, human mobility and human collaboration. And those are the kind of big themes that have emerged from our very detailed technical work. So this is one of the earliest manuscripts that we have analysed. It's part of the collection of Trinity College, Cambridge, and was produced, still some controversy about where it came from, either in England or the East Frankish Kingdom in the first half of the 10th century. And you have here the opening illumination where the author is presenting his book to the Pope. Analysis gave us quite a surprise. We discovered two types of blue. One which we were one type we were expecting, that was what we call indigo, or probably a local plant dye woad. But the other blue, the more turquoise blue, was quite a surprise.
Yes, and the more turquoise blue was Egyptian blue. And this is one of the first synthetic pigments made in Egypt in about 2,500 years before Christ. And it was used until the end of the Roman Empire. It is a calcium copper silicate obtained by mixing sand, crushed limestone, and natron and fragments of bronze or copper and heated at a high temperature. And one technique that really works well with these pigments is VIL. VIL stands for visible induced infrared luminescence, and the principle is that very few pigments, and Egyptian blue is one of them, when they are illuminated with lights in the visible range, they can emit radiation or luminescence in the infrared region. So because the human eye doesn't see infrared radiation, we just apply a filter to the camera, and what we obtain is this kind of image in a grayscale, where if Egyptian blue is present, it appears bright white. So in this technique, which is a technical image, we can visualize where the Egyptian blue is present onto this page, and of course then it can later confirmed by other techniques. And of course, the presence of Egyptian blue on an English medieval manuscript is strange, and it raises many questions. We don't know if the artists recycled the pigment from ancient artifacts, possibly Roman artifacts, or if they rediscovered the manufacturing technique. It is still quite controversial in this field, but it has huge implications for our understanding of the sophistication of medieval artists and the survival of ancient worlds in the so-called Dark Ages.
Lovely. So one of the other things, well, that raises questions about innovation, and one of the real excitements of our work has been to come across pigments that have not been found before, or to find the earliest examples so far detected of their use. And one of those is a pigment called mosaic gold, which Flavia will tell you a bit more about in a minute. And we think we have found the earliest so far documented use of this synthetic pigment in this manuscript, which was produced for King Edward I of England in probably the 1260s, possibly in London, or possibly even in Palestine, in Acre, where he was on crusade. And it's a text it's a Roman text translated into Anglo-Norman, the French spoken by the English aristocracy at this period, and was commissioned by his wife, Eleanor of Castile, for him. Flavia, do you want to take up the story?
Yes. So mosaic gold is a tin sulfide, and is it obtained with a complex synthetic process, melting tin, mixing it with mercury, and then adding sulfur, heating for a long time until the pigment is created. And under the microscope, it appears as glittering particles, as you can see in this slide. We don't know exactly when or why it was first created, but it probably arrived in Europe from China and the Islamic world, and it was probably created through an alchemic reaction. What we know about this pigment is that it was normally used as a yellow pigment instead of an alternative to gold. As you can see here, it was used to paint the hair or the frame of the illumination.
Lovely. It's a very interesting pigment and raises all sorts of questions about discoveries and whether discoveries come about through contact with other illuminating traditions or through experimentation. This is another example that we found where we think we found the earliest attested use so far of a particular pigment. This is a wonderful piece of art, really. It's a cutting. A cutting is a section cut out of a manuscript and sort of framed as a separate object. Happened to manuscripts very often in the 19th century, and we have a large collection of them at the Fitzwilliam. This is from a particularly splendid choir book made for a monastery on the island of Murano in Venice, and shows a very Byzantine subject, the Dormition of the Virgin. In the West, the Virgin Mary is ascends into heaven, but in the tradition of Eastern Christianity, her death is shown as her falling asleep and her soul escaping from her body. So this comes from a book that was made in Venice in the early 15th century, and analysis here has shown the presence of a blue, an unexpected blue called smalt.
Yes, and smalt is a ground cobalt-based blue glass. And on this cutting, we use macro XRF as a technique, which allows to visualize the distribution of the different chemical elements. In this case, the map is showing cobalt in red and potassium in blue, and when they are mixed, it appears purple. So cobalt is associated with smalt and potassium with ultramarine blue. And what we can see is that while the blue of all the figures' robes in the illumination is ultramarine, so we can only see the blue of the potassium, the rest of the blue areas, as the blue of the sky, the initial G, and all the blue areas outside the illumination, they contain a mixture of ultramarine and smalt. If smalt was used to achieve a particular tone, or if it was added as a bulking agent to the most precious ultramarine, this is still unclear. And to our knowledge, this is the first identification of smalt in an illuminated manuscript. And of course, it is highly suggestive of relationships with glass making industry in Venice and contacts between artists working in different media.
Okay, another discovery, and this one is a real mystery, is a white, mercury white. And we found this in a manuscript that's very important to the museum, which we call the Fitzwilliam Missal, because it's one of the few manuscripts that have which were handed down in the Fitzwilliam family, and which were then bequeathed to the museum by Richard Fitzwilliam in 1816. So he's obviously a member of the British aristocracy, and his family had roots in Yorkshire. And this manuscript, of all the texts that you need to say the Mass, the Christian Mass, was produced in York in the 1460s.
And the most commonly used white pigment in art history is lead whites based on lead, but when we analyzed many of the white areas in this manuscript, we found mercury, which is normally associated with a red pigment vermilion. But further analysis confirmed the presence of a mercury chloride. And in particular, we found a mercurous chloride, which was called calomel and used since the Middle Ages for medicinal use or for women's cosmetics. As a pigment, it was first identified on an object in the V&A collection made in Peru in the 17th century and on a couple of other objects there. And we found it in this manuscript and also on a few portrait miniatures made in England during the Tudor and Stuart period. We still don't know how widespread the use of calomel as a pigment was. But this finding, we think it's important because it adds a pigment previously unknown to the palettes used for manuscripts.
Fantastic.
So it's still a mystery.
Okay, so those are some of the discoveries we've made about new pigments, new materials. We've also learned a lot through our techniques about ways of working. And it's always been acknowledged, I think, that making a manuscript was an intensely collaborative process. You have a parchment maker, you have a scribe, and you possibly have a penwork artist and another artist. But we were, I think, surprised over the years at sometimes the number of different artists involved in making a manuscript. And there were various ways that we could identify those different artists, either through very distinctive palettes, they use different pigments from each other, or sometimes through other techniques showing how they prepared to illuminate. So we're going to start first of all by looking at collaboration in an absolutely fantastic manuscript called the Breslau Psalter, which was made in Wrocław in what's now Poland in the 1260s for the marriage of the for the Duke of Breslau, Duke Henry III of Breslau, to Helena, daughter of the Duke of Saxony, and they married in 1263. It's one of the most richly illuminated manuscripts to survive from the Middle Ages. And I'm very glad to say I hope it will be featuring in an exhibition soon. A lot of focus in the scholarship has been on a very famous Italian artist who seems to have been taken to the court in Breslau to work on it as a special commission. The so-called Gaibana master. What we found by analysing pigments in the flesh, sorry, back one, Flavia, don't worry, in the flesh tones was that he had an assistant who worked in a similar way to him, but used slightly different set of pigments. So the magnified image on the left, that's the master at work, where he uses a green base, a green earth base for his flesh tones, whereas his assistant on another page uses azurite to model the flesh tones. As we went on to look at other images in the manuscript, we analysed the flesh tones there very carefully as well. And again, this enabled us to distinguish between the different artists' hands. And in fact, we think there are probably up to 7 artists working in the rest of the manuscript, all of them working in much more, a style much more associated with Central European illumination, and therefore they were probably local artists. But even so, they had a very distinctive way of approaching painting faces. Hand A uses indigo for the flesh and ultramarine for beards, whereas hand B uses indigo in both the flesh and the beards. Hand C uses thick strokes of vermilion over indigo, and hand D is different again. So this very, very detailed work, looking at the pigments and how they're used, and also we must say magnification is, as Joanna said, an incredibly powerful tool, really enabled us to establish the range and number of artists involved in this project, and therefore, you know, an increased understanding of its prestige and importance to the royal court in Breslau. I've said that we also looked, if you like, underneath the painting to see how artists prepared to work. And I've just got one set of images here from another very beautiful royal manuscript, The Hours of Isabella Stuart, which was made in the Loire Valley for another royal marriage, this time of the Duke of Brittany, in the 1440s. Here, infrared techniques can be incredibly useful because they allow you to see the preparatory work that's done under the painted surface. And what we were able to see is that this artist, the Rohan master, who is one of the most accomplished artists of the late Middle Ages, had a really distinctive style for his underdrawing. If you look at the magnified image on the right, you can see that there are these series of curvy loops that create the areas that need to be shaded. And that enabled us to distinguish his work from other artists in the manuscript. And in fact, from people thought that he was responsible for the entire manuscript. We can now see through looking at the underdrawing that there are at least 3 artists working on this volume. Infrared was also really important in allowing us to see not only collaboration between artists, but actually finding out something about the different origins of teams of artists. So in the case of this manuscript, it's another 15th century French manuscript, a very beautifully illuminated encyclopedia called The Book of the Properties of Things. Looking under those red square backgrounds with infrared allowed us to see the word rot. So this is a manuscript produced in Paris. One might perhaps expect to see rouge, but we know from documentary sources like tax records and other things that there were very, very many illuminators from Germany and the Low Countries working in Paris at this time. The book trade was incredibly cosmopolitan. So we have here an instruction by the master who was planning the illumination of the manuscript to some of his assistants in what we must assume was their native or their mother tongue, probably Middle Dutch or German. So that gives us really nice, strong example of international collaboration or the kind of international nature of that illuminating workshop. We also found this in a wonderful English manuscript of the 12th century, so much earlier, called the Berry Bible, which is considered to be one of the sort of highlights of Romanesque art in England and attributed to very securely to a professional artist working in England at the time called Master Hugo. He was also a master metal worker. And his style, you can probably see, is very heavily influenced by sort of Greek and Byzantine painting. And it's always been a real kind of mystery. This manuscript really sort of stands out as a sort of separate kind of work from other manuscripts produced in England at the same time. It's very distinctive. What infrared allowed us to do here was again to find instructions to illuminators under the painting, this time in the form of letters of the alphabet. So under that blue and purple, we have A or P for azure or pourpre, maybe in French, maybe in Latin. But then even more excitingly, we also found in another area on the same page, a Greek letter, phi, for, I'm going to pronounce this wrongly, phoenix, meaning a very, very fiery red. Now, what that suggests to us is that all the hypotheses around Master Hugo having been exposed to art in the Greek-speaking world are absolutely spot on. It's possible that he may even have been a Greek speaker himself, or he had someone from that tradition in the workshop. But either way, it just opens up a kind of world within the illuminating workshop of people from different linguistic backgrounds and different cultural traditions. Okay, we're going to move away from colour now and look at one of the other most important and, well, who doesn't love a bit of gold? characteristic aspects of the most luxuriously illuminated manuscripts from the Middle Ages, and that is working with gold. And I'm just going to ask Flavia to introduce this section.
As we have seen in many examples in this presentation, artists often use precious metals because they gave shine to the manuscript page. There was great sophistication in the use of pigments, but we discovered that it was the same with the use of metals. And for this section on metals and gold in particular, two techniques were useful, in particular, microscopy and XRF. In the case of the metal leaf, microscopy helps to document the tooling, if present, and the ball. And XRF is a spectroscopic technique. It means X-ray fluorescence, and it gives us a spectrum able to detect the presence of gold, the impurities, or the use of silver, which often appears black because it's tarnished, or a mixture of the two. So those are the main techniques that we used to study, to investigate the metals used in manuscripts.
Yeah, so there's a historical shift over the period that we have studied, from the earlier into the much later Middle Ages. In the earlier years, the predominant form of gold is much less used in these early years, but the predominant form of it is shell gold, which is essentially a ground or powdered gold mixed with a binder to form a paint applied with a brush. And then over the course of the Middle Ages, there's a transition into using a gold foil or gold leaf, which is laid on a ground. So let's have a look at some examples of that. This is a wonderful manuscript from Reichenau in southern Germany, made in the Benedictine Abbey there. And the parchment is dyed purple in imitation of imperial and Byzantine manuscripts. In the ancient world, that purple was probably created through the grinding up the shells of mollusks, the famous Tyrian purple. But what we discovered here is that the purple was actually created by using local lichen to create a purple dye called orchil. The gold, you can see dark areas which are actually tarnished silver. But if we zoom in, you can see how the gold was written with a brush very, very accurately in shell gold. Very, very beautiful work. And those indentations are the ruling of the page, so that scribes and illuminators could regulate the size of their letters. As we move into the 12th and 13th centuries, we find gold, as I said, applied as a leaf. And I think what it's really important to remember when we're thinking about this is that these manuscripts were not seen under regular, constant electric light in the way that we would encounter them, but either under natural light or under candlelight. So all the time that you're looking at these surfaces, the light is probably changing and flickering and playing across the surface of the gold. So this is another book of Psalms made in Peterborough in the early 13th century. And we have an image here at the beginning of Psalm 52 of David and Goliath. And the painted figures are set against a gold background, which you can see has been highly burnished and what we call tooled. Let's go to the next slide, Flavia. Further magnification. Essentially, the gold is laid over a ground, and then it's burnished with a kind of, can be a stone or even an animal tooth. And you can see in the high magnification the kind of scratch marks that come from that burnishing. And then it is tooled with, in this case, a stylus in a kind of diagonally patterned thing, but also with punches to create decorative shapes in the background. And as I say, there will be a play of flickering light across this shimmering surface, which is designed really, I think, and people would agree, to evoke the heavenly light of, of revelation, if you like. If we move on to another one, Flavia. Here, essentially the story of gold in our period is of increasing complexity. We saw that gold which had been ruled in a grid and punched with various shapes. Here, shell gold is actually used and painted onto gold leaf to create these lovely foliate designs, which adds another kind of luminous quality to the surface. And then in the next, and I think we realized, didn't we, through analysis, that one of those uses of shell gold had been tinted with a red earth to make it a warmer color to contrast with the gold. Is that right, Flavia?
Yes.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, so that's, if you like, what's going on the surface of the gold. What we also realized as we worked is that there's a lot going on under the gold as well.
Yes, and we saw that the ball is this kind of ground layer under gilding, and it acts as a sort of cushion that allows the leaf, the metal leaf, to be polished and tooled. It can be white, but it can also be colored, as we can see here, pink, red, gray, and this gives a different hue, warm or cold in general, to the metal leaf. So it was intentionally colored with different materials to obtain a specific hue. When we think of ball, we tend to use as a red thing, especially for paintings, but we found out that the color changes a lot in manuscripts. And in this manuscript in particular, we see an advanced use of the ball, because we can see in the grounds of the backgrounds that the ball is red under the metal leaf, but under the crown of this character, the ball is yellow. So this was intentionally made to create a different tonality that was probably more evident at the time.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that sort of sophisticated understanding of materials was really amazing to see. I think our final section, I think, about the actual manuscripts and how we've worked with them. I guess we're returning to colour here, and just want to talk to you about how the lengths, if you like, that illuminators went to achieve the perfect colour, and why that might have been. In this case, we have a very theologically significant image, of course. It's of the crucifixion of Christ, surrounded by the two thieves, with the Virgin and John the Evangelist at the foot of the cross. And it was painted by Simon Benning, one of the greatest illuminators in that final flourishing of illumination in the Low Countries in the early 16th century. And it was originally in a book of hours made for Albrecht of Brandenburg, who was both the Archbishop and the Elector of Mainz in the Holy Roman Empire, and an opponent of Luther, so an incredibly important figure in the Catholic Church. When we analysed the flesh tones of the figures, we found that the good thief on the left and Christ in the centre are painted in a very similar palette of lead white modelled with brown ochre and azurite blue, although the thief has more vermilion mixed in and is slightly pinker. But on the right-hand side, the bad thief who rejects Christ is painted in a mixture rich in yellow and brown ochres. That yellow is very significant because it is associated with one of the four humours, which is how the Middle Ages understood temperament. And that humour is the choleric temperament, a very angry temperament. So in a sense, the colour choice comes laden with symbolic meaning. We also found a real commitment to finding just the right colour in manuscripts which depict creatures from nature. And I'm going to ask Flavia to talk to you about the examples in this lovely manuscript from the Fitzwilliam, which is called the Bird Psalter, and which was made for a royal marriage, which actually never happened because one of the protagonists died in London in the 1280s.
Yes, and I will show you just a magnification of this folio here. And here the artist obtained 2 different shades of gray by mixing different pigments to better represent nature. So we can see that the bullfinch and the duck, they are really similar to the real animals, and instead of using the same kind of gray, the artist chose to use a bluish pigment, ultramarine, for the bullfinch to recreate the slightly bluish tint of the animal. And Suzanne, if you want to introduce these other examples.
Yes, we'll just whiz through this one. This is another English manuscript of very similar date, which is very unusual because it's a legal document. It's a charter giving one of the courtiers of King Edward I the right to hunt in a certain area in Lancashire, and giving his heirs that right as well. Most of these documents are very plain and very workaday, but in this case, someone decided that it would be great to illustrate the kinds of animals covered by that hunting privilege.
Yes, and again, here we can see that the different shades of gray are obtained under the microscope. We can see that they are obtained with different and subtle changes in the hue and the pigments employed. So for instance, the stag is made with azurite and vermilion, so there is a tint of red. The ox is made with azurite and indigo, so 2 blue pigments, and the huntsman is made with ultramarine ash, so another different blue pigments. And again, this is the intention of the artist, to create very subtle changes to the hue.
Fantastic. So I hope that's given you a sense of the sort of range of approaches and the range of kinds of results that we've managed to achieve, and also some of the bigger questions that the research contributes to, but also leaves open for further discussion. We just wanted to show you very quickly, in a sense, our commitment to making sure that we shared these results with as broad a public as possible. So we had a fantastic exhibition in 2016 called Colour, the Art and Science of Illuminated Manuscripts, and you have some images from the galleries there. And then more recently in 2022, we had a smaller exhibition focusing on the long history of British illumination from 600 to 1600. And what was also unusual and distinctive, I think, was that we didn't hide the science, if you like, behind the interpretation. Behind the scenes, it was front and center in the interpretation of the manuscript, so that people could see not only the results we'd found, but how we'd got there. We've also published a great deal. That was the Colour catalogue, and then a handbook of case studies which went alongside it. And in a sense, that was, we sort of think of this as MINIARE phase 1, where we ranged broadly over all sorts of different manuscripts to try and, you know, see the kinds of things that we could discover. And now in a second phase, we have the project on British illuminators, which is the first project really to track pigment use in one artistic tradition across time. And then more recently, Flavia has published an article in Heritage Science using these techniques on printed books, which is a very different kind of a methodology, because each manuscript is unique. So when you characterize its palette, you find out about that. But of course, printed books are produced in editions, and heritage science approaches enable us to look at different copies within that edition and work out much more about the production process of multiples. And then finally, I think, oh gosh, we have an online resource, which we mustn't forget. Sorry, we've plenty of time for questions, which we really recommend to you. You can really take a sort of deeper dive into some of the manuscripts. I'm just going to carry on, Flavia, if that's okay. And finally, I just wanted to say that we've worked very hard to engage with communities of all sorts with our research. We have lots of community-based projects at the museum, and often these audiences will be finding out about our results even before we publish them. It's a nice way to kind of test out what we've been discovering and how clear it is. So our final slide is just a thank you. It lists everyone who's worked on the project, and thanks all the librarians and curators who have allowed us access to their material, and thanks our two principal funders. We've had a whole mosaic of funding, but those have been the most important ones. So thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Suzanne and Flavia, for taking us for this most exciting journey full of color and gold. I think all of us will now look at manuscripts in a very different way. I would like to invite questions from our lovely audience. If you wanted to ask the question, you can put it into the chat and we will ask it on your behalf, or you may just raise the hand or just unmute yourself and speak. It's a very informal setting. Please feel free. And maybe as you are thinking about your next question, may I ask a question?
Of course. So
you told us about this amazing project that took 12 years of your life, and I'm sure, and resulted in this amazing results. I was particularly interested in seeing how much migrant workers contributed to actually what we felt might have been French School of Illumination, and you found out. I think that is a very important finding, and indeed very interdisciplinary finding. Yes, we may pick up on this in, let's say, social sciences and look how that was happening. But my question is about the future. How are you going to take forward this project? What is there that you haven't managed to do within this project?
Oh, okay, well, I'll talk from a historical point of view, and then maybe Flavia, you might have something to say about technical approaches we haven't used before or may come on stream. I think we would like to, I think it's true to say that, manuscript illumination is not just a European phenomenon by any stretch of the imagination. These kinds of books are produced, across the world, really, at various times. And I think there has been less focus on other illuminating traditions, and I think we would like to move into that space once we can get the kind of relevant curatorial expertise on board, because I think it's really important to say that the work is most meaningful when you've got scholars, curators, and scientists working together to refine the questions. It's not just a question of going in there and seeing what the pigments are. You need that whole hinterland of understanding the context and the tradition to make the questions meaningful. So I think we'd want to range over a much broader geographical area as the first priority, really. Flavia, have you got anything to add?
Well, in terms of analysis, I can just say that when this project started, we had not many analytical techniques and we relied on collaborations and so on, but especially in the last couple of years, the Fitzwilliam acquired new instruments and we have better microscopes, the macro XRF, and it would be good to maybe try to solve some questions with this kind of techniques, like for instance, the shell gold painted onto the gold leaf, maybe with a macro XRF can be better seen. And I think the heritage science is moving towards a better visualization on the entire page instead of spot analysis. So yeah, I think there's a lot more that we can do in the future.
Thank you. We hope you will do a lot more in the future and we hope to hear about it. We have words of appreciation in our chat and people say thank you for describing how the analysis led to artistic and historic interpretations. And some people just say this was amazing. Thank you. We have one question. You said the team was multidisciplinary. How on earth did you get here? Are you scientists by background?
Yes, I am. I'm a heritage conservation scientist and heritage scientist with my PhD. But yes, I think it's essential while working in a museum setting to collaborate with different kind of professionals, and often Suzanne and I do analysis together, and I think it's really helpful because she can actually describe what she's looking into the page, and I can tell her what we can do and what are the limitations. So yes, I am a scientist by background. Suzanne is not, but she's learning.
Yes, I'm serving an apprenticeship. It's great. Yeah, I think it is a very multidisciplinary thing. We also work closely with our colleagues in conservation who really help us to understand structures, materials, especially, you know, the parchment surfaces that the images are painted on. And I mean, for me, I come from a humanities background where, you know, it's much more traditional to work by yourself. And I have to say, I have found this collaborative way of working just fantastic. Things are slower, perhaps, but you know, the results are much more than the sum of the parts. So I find it very inspiring, actually.
Yes, I think we are learning in academia that once we are at first we are trying to become expert at something, and then we learn that actually being expert at something doesn't explain much really.
Yeah.
And we try to look for our colleagues in other areas, experts in other areas, trying to find this explanation that is very difficult to find in a disciplinary way. Any questions from the audience? I can see how you can be. Suzanne, yes?
Hi, another Suzanne. Yeah,
Hi.
My area of interest research-wise is Ghent Bruges manuscripts.
Wow.
So the Simon Benning aspect of things is absolutely fascinating. And I wondered, it's been an amazing project, and I'm only watching from the edges, all you're doing with all the different kinds of manuscripts. If I wanted to know more about what you found about those, is that in some of the publications that you have, or would that be, yeah?
Yes, it is in some of the publications. So I think for those Ghent Bruges things, if you looking at the colour catalogue and the handbook, also published by Breppels, would be good. But I'd also like to say that we always, sometimes it takes a while, but we always produce a formal technical report on any manuscript we analyse.
Wow.
And if there are manuscripts that you're particularly interested in that we have analysed, we would share that report with you. And what we ask people to do is cite it in the same way that they would cite an unpublished PhD or something like that, so that, you know, it's fully credited, etc., etc. But no, we're very committed to sharing results as much as we can.
Absolutely fascinating. So thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to let you know, Suzanne and Flavia, that there is more words of thank you, and just so happy, and they feel that, you know, that your presentation was particularly insightful. There's one more question. Are the technical reports catalogued?
No. So at the moment, that's a very good question. And we don't, I think, as far as I'm aware, put them in the university electronic repository, do we, Flavia?
No, not yet, no.
So that's something to think about for the future. At the moment, it would be a question of writing. We have a generic email address, don't we? Is it science@Fitzmuseum or scientific research?
Yes, scientific research. Yeah.
Yeah, scientific research at fitzmuseum.cam.ac.uk, and we're very happy to, you know, look back through our files and see if something you're interested in does have a technical report.
Thank you so
But
much.
that's something to think about for the future, actually, as we're improving our research pages on our website. We could potentially give a list of the manuscripts for which technical reports exist. So thank you, that's a good suggestion.
Thank you. I think that brings us to the end of the evening. Thank you to our speakers, Suzanne and Flavia, and to everyone who was working behind the scenes to organize and produce our webinar, Kate and Oli. This year's award winners were announced on 30th May, and there are 4 worthy winners from the UK and many others from other European countries. And we will, of course, be organizing seminars. So have a look at the Europa Nostra website. We will be also inviting you, informing you about the future webinars. I have heard gossip, one of them sometime soon may have something to do with Hungary, but we will tell you more when we invite you for the talk. This was only one of a series of our webinars presenting Europa Nostra Awards, and you can see recordings of this one and the previous webinars on our website, website of Europa Nostra UK in the news area. And I think that is the end of, and one more important thing, if you know about the project that is worthy Europa Nostra Award, we have 4 different categories, please, there is already call for 2025 awards, and please let us know. You can write to me directly. If you Google my name, it will come back at my university address or Europa Nostra UK address, or just direct them to the homepage, European Heritage Awards, Europa Nostra Awards, and encourage them to apply. Other than that, I hope you will have a pleasant evening. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye.
I'm just taking away some people who haven't. Okay, there we go. I've removed the last 2. They obviously weren't attending. That was absolutely fascinating.
That was okay. I took away some others. I was removing them as you were. Kate.